Lunark is a 2023 step platformer from Canary Studios, a Montreal-based indie game company, WayForward Games, an America-based indie games publisher, and me. Well, not me directly, but I and 2,823 other people all pledged some money, around $28 a head, back in 2019. It raised $81,655 on the back of a promise of a pixel art step puzzle platformer with rotoscoped cutscenes. That's exactly what I got. It's exactly what it is. Huh. Well, short script. I guess I can knock off early. Lunark is excellent. I did back it on Kickstarter entirely based on the trailer and because it reminded me of Flashback. I loved that game and I loved all of the first third of it I ever played and the weeks of time I spent playing and replaying that part of the game. Flashback was a great game for its time, and I don't just mean that because video games hadn't invented machine guns yet. It was great because the whole game fit on a 3.5-inch floppy disk, so if you saw it at a mate's place, you could zip it up and take your own copy home and maybe photocopy some copy protection, I think. Or their copy was already cracked. Probably. In that time, a single floppy was a great size for a game. You weren't logging onto the internet to download new games all the time. You were having these rare meetings of going around to a friend's house or seeing someone you didn't often see to broaden your network of available software. And in that space, Flashback was great. We had a name for this kind of arrangement. They were called sneaker nets, where you would typically come to anyone's house with a couple of discs, just in case they had something you wanted, and you'd put stuff on those discs that maybe they'd want. Flashback was a game that unfolded. Setting aside the core mystery, you were dropped into tabula rasa. It was a game whose mechanical systems felt like it was immediately available, just there under your fingertips as you played it, but which you had to learn how to coax out of them with the right positions, the right timing, the right combinations of buttons. Learning how to play it meant getting to know how it worked through the plot itself, which, and I know I'm not alone in this, often meant restarting the whole game to see an early cutscene again, because you'd gotten stuck and you didn't know what it told you to do next because you pressed a button and skipped a cutscene wholly, so maybe that's where the secret was. Flashback was a time abyss of a game, with a big beating mystery at its heart, compelling you to finish it, and I never did, and nobody I know ever did, but we all agreed that it played really well, and we liked it. It was cool, and it looked amazing, and we definitely liked it. Do you know how it ends? Nah. Nobody did. Why did you stop? There was that bit, that bit. The bit that stopped you. You can go and play the original Flashback in a number of places, including a GOG remake that may be fine, I don't know, and honestly don't really care. The stylization filter they put on it looks like my attempt to hide photoshopped out tattoos on pictures by making the whole image's skin texture rubbery and shiny. That's not even touching on the 3D remake, which is, well, I was told that if I can't say anything nice, and the company that made it is probably out of business now since the only other game they made was Amy. The thing with going back and playing these old DOS games is that you need some heavy nostalgia to stick with them, or a deep and abiding interest in getting to the end for some other silly reason, like a self-assigned dedication to try and play a game every week to get through sort of game pile, as it were. Most of them work fine, but also they're not very good at encouraging you to play them. Some of them are really repetitive, their narratives and conclusions aren't really very interesting, the logic can be positively absurd at times, but also, very importantly, most of them have awkward interfaces. Not bad, not necessarily bad, not a huge problem, but there's a lot of game interface language that you marinate in right now that is kind of universalized by some things succeeding and then most people adopting stuff so they're reasonably similar. WASD movement, which is the standard for first-person shooters and nowadays a lot of platformers, was not the default in Doom. Nor was it the default in Quake, where you were expected to toggle strafing with the Alt key. Sierra, one of the companies most renowned for a point-and-click game of the generation, made point-and-click games for less than half their life. And even then, the model people assume is standard only lasted for about 5 years. When you go back and play these old DOS-era games, you are very likely to find an interface designed by someone with some very specific ideas of what was natural and intuitive, and often you couldn't customize them at all. Some designers thought the most natural way to move left and right was with the O and P keys, and jump and duck with the Q and A. I bring this up to you to underscore that Lunark, as a game, owes a lot of how it looks to this particular period of rotoscoped pixel art that we mostly tie to Flashback and Prince of Persia, but what it owes about how it plays and the story it tells is not about how Flashback plays, but rather how I remember Flashback feeling. I mean, okay, yes, you really could simplify that into Flashback, but it plays really well, and that's a place to start. It's not just, though, that thing you like in a bigger cup. I like Lunark a lot, and I like it as its own thing, which is very important. I'm finding myself weirdly reticent to tell you what happens in it, which almost feels like a spoiler warning, but as much as anything else, I want to feel like you can just approach this video and know, hey, this game is good in ways that are best experienced. Enjoying Lunark, I had all these moments where I thought, oh, is this going to be like that thing from other games? And the game has an almost perfect sense for when doing that thing would piss me off, and then routes around it. Or it works out when it would be perfect to do, and then revels in it. You know something a lot of step platformers don't do very well? Combat and boss battles. Know what Lunark does a surprisingly good job of? Yeah, I was surprised. It's got good combat. The step platformer tends to be a game which makes a puzzle of movement, with really deliberate and fixed animation movement to boot. And how do you treat that kind of movement in combat? You know, when there's immediate risk of harm. It feels weird to say this, but Lunark has a number of boss fights that feel like they cracked the puzzle without complicating the interface, and it's just really quite good. Lunark has boss battles, and they're interesting, and they don't feel like they're repeating the same basic pattern, nor do they feel like they overstay their welcome. It's very honest. Hey, this is a boss battle, and all the bits of how it works are visible, and that honestly plays into the honesty of the rest of the game. There are sure some execution problems. The game doesn't mislead or lie to you. The narrative, which is about a main character trying to solve a mystery, is mostly a mystery because people are withholding information, not because you're somehow wrong about something important. It's a game that feels classical and invigorated by deeply loving its source material. Where Flashback unfolded through stages to reveal a game that was pretty good, Lunark is every bit as good, with a better interface and an equally solid narrative told through the same mix of short cutscenes and character dialogue and play experience as Flashback did. And the story isn't complicated or even particularly complex. It's obtuse. For the most part, the sequence of events that make up the story and its background all follow a reasonably coherent, sensible set of choices, but only because your character doesn't know what's going on is there any mystery to you. And it's full of these characters who have maybe one or two lines of dialogue and a portrait, of whom I am very fond, despite their minor presence in the whole game. Lunark is amazing, and part of why it's amazing is because it feels like it loves Flashback enough to know how to do Flashback but better. You can make things that are like the things you love, and you could just add more care, more love, and a big monster that hugs you, and an opportunity to pet some animals. That's all pretty cool, and I think you should try and check out Lunark.